Hello. It's a great joy to be with you as we have our first master conference for heart work here on our Touching the Sunrise heart work community. And I love the words touching the sunrise, although some others may find them maybe silly, but I believe that it's always possible to touch the sunrise in our hearts. And it may seem like we don't know how. It may seem like the sun is so far away. How could we touch the sunrise? We can't touch the sunrise in reality, but we can always touch the sunrise, the hope, the new beginnings, the renewal. The beautiful reality is God brings about in the depths of our heart. And so that's kind of what these presentations are all about. How do we move in that direction? How do we come to know what's happening in our own souls so as to be able to walk forward in our life with intentionality, with strength, with courage, with the wisdom that knows how to know when it is touched, how to know when God Himself has touched us, and how to respond to that. I'd like to begin with a story. After I finished putting together elements of this conference last night, I went to make some packages for our web store. And in the process, I was reflecting on the material and reflecting on what it meant for my life, on what realities I had to face in my own life. And so I was just quietly making my way through the process of making packages. And I began to realize that I had some unrest in my heart. I've been in a situation where there has been triangling. A message, quote, was given to me by someone who hasn't been able to directly address people, to directly speak with people, and that she works with. And a particular message had been given to me that affected me in my work pretty directly. And I was very kind about it, very nice about it, because it was indeed, I was following directions from a former directive that had been given. So it was a perfectly innocent mistake. However, there was something in my heart that was deeply unrestful. It was not in repose. It was a sense that a little volcanic eruption, a little tantrum, a little pain, a little anger, a little aggression, a little violence. All this was quietly going on underneath the surface of my heart. And as I reflected on the material that we're going to be going through today, I began to get in touch with that in a new way, in a deeper way. And, I realized that there's a part of us, our ego, our unconscious ego, if you will, that has an idea of who we are, of who we want to be, of what kind of person we are, of what kind of a communicator we are, what kind of a colleague we are, what kind of a parent we are, what kind of a daughter or a sister or a brother we are, what kind of spiritual person we are. And it kind of makes these images that get thrown out in front of us. We go like, oh, isn't that beautiful? That's me. Isn't that amazing? That's me. Wow, look at me. And of course, this is all an unconscious human reality that's going on in our hearts. But in reality, I had to admit I was small. At that moment, I was being petty. I was angry. I didn't like being told what to do. I was not being a very spiritual person. I was not being a very good colleague. there was a part of me in reality that was not focused on God, was not running into the arms of God in the midst of this, but running to protect myself, to save myself, to exalt myself. And to do that, I was creating all these stories about myself, about the other persons involved. I was labeling people and judging people and predicting what was going to happen in the future and rehearsing what I was going to say next time. And we all know how the story goes. And we all can probably, from some point in our life, plug in our own details. So we're looking today at how the ego keeps us from experiencing God's love. I think we are here. There we go. So we're going to start out with some teachings from Dorotheus of Gaza, St. John of the Ladder, and other, St. Chrysostom, St. Thalassios, these spiritual greats of the desert, and fathers who really taught a very profound spirituality. And I like them because they help me to kind of fill in the bricks in the wall of my spiritual foundation, of my human building, the temple of the Holy Spirit. And one of these marvelous little bricks, if you will, that help us to see ourselves in a larger light is this, that the faculties of our soul, our imagination, our thoughts, our heart, our love, even our anger, our pride, our arrogance, all of these were given to us in their very natural condition. And in that condition, if we look at Adam and Eve, we see that all of this ran towards God. The rational soul, Abba Dorothea says, works naturally when its appetitive part longs for virtue, and that insensitive part strives for it. So the insensitive part would be anger, and the part that gives strength and courage. And the rational part devotes itself to the contemplation of beings. So the proper functioning of our soul is that all these elements of our life, of our being, and of our heart were created for the new man that we find in St. Paul. We have received reason in order that we may know Christ, our desire in order that we might hasten to him. We have memory in order that we might carry him in us, since Christ is the archetype for man. But through the fall and through our own personal falls, there is this inclining away from virtue. And it's a love of pleasure that leads us away from that hard, narrow path of virtue into a path that prepares the way for the passions and in the end gives them a firm place in ourselves. So if we look at, we were given the ability to love, the capacity to love. And in so doing, the goal was to be able to live in intimacy and oneness with God, with others, and with ourselves. We were given the gift of anger so that we might be angry against the evil spirit who's tempting us and leading us into his ways. We could fight against that with anger, with strength. We were given pride so we would rejoice in God's glory. We would take pride in what God has done. We were given the grace to desire to excel, to this sense of ambition in virtue, to excel in virtue, and a certain arrogance that would be arrogant against the evil one. So the presence of the virtues is the natural state of man and woman, while the passions instead are an unnatural condition. Now, we might step back and say, well, what we most know is the passions. And it seems like virtue is the exception to the rule here. However, virtue is the natural way, the natural state in which we were created, and the passions came after. And they are unnatural to who we are intrinsically as a creature of God. In a sense, then, we have altered and perverted the energies of the soul and steered them from their natural state to the unnatural state. So what does this look like in reality? Well, our love, instead of leading us to intimacy and oneness, can lead to lust, in which we treat others as objects for our pleasure. We can think of probably very small elements in our own life, but we can open up the newspapers, read the novels that are being written today, kind of look around us and see the perversion of this beautiful reality and gift of us that God gave us in our creation. So perverted from intimacy and oneness, which would have brought us so much joy, to where we treat others as objects for our own pleasure. We were given anger to be angry against the power of the evil spirit leading us to evil. And instead, we get angry against our brother and our sister. So I going back to my opening story there, I could be angry at the individuals involved. But in reality, I should be angry at what the evil one was actually instigating in me at that moment, that I had these thoughts, these stories, these judgments, this anger, this need to defend my own pride, to take my picture from my ego and put it up there and say, that's who I am, and you should bow down and pay attention and respect me. So instead of pride in God's glory, we have pride in our own glory. Instead of being angry against what the devil is doing to us and to that person, we get angry against our brothers and sisters and against ourselves. Instead of excelling in virtue, we seek to, or we end up excelling in evil. And instead of an arrogance before the evil spirit, like I will not give in, we have an arrogance before our brothers and sisters. So I just had a little quote here at the beginning. So what are the passions? Of course, we all are familiar with the 7, quote, capital sins, the 7 passions of the heart. Passion is derived from the verb pasco, to suffer, and it indicates an inner sickness. According to St. Philotheus of Sinai, passion in the strict sense they define as that which lurks passionately in the soul over a long period. So for the past 4 days, that had been lurking in my heart. So when a sin is repeated often and lurks in our soul for a long time, it can be called a passion. Passion is the movement which takes place in the soul, while sinful practice is that which is manifested in the body. So when we are inwardly healed, there's something very beautiful about these writings and teachings of the early desert fathers, the early holy fathers of spirituality in the East, because all of Christianity was in the East at that early 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century. When where they really looked at sin not as something legal that needed to be judged and punished, but as a sickness that needed to be inwardly healed by the action of divine grace and through our own struggle accompanying that. When we are inwardly healed by the action of grace in our struggle, then we find that these passions are not suppressed or obliterated, but they actually return in their focus to what they were given us to be, what they were meant to be. They turn toward God. They rush towards Him, and they attain knowledge and communion with Him. And a perfect example of that is the Samaritan woman. So here we have a beautiful picture of the parable, the story, of the meeting of Jesus with the Samaritan woman. And here she has come up and she is getting her own water from the well. She's come in the heat of the day, a very long way by herself, so as to avoid the eyes and the gossip and the disrespect probably, and the rejection of the other people of the town, because as we learn later, she has had 5 or 6 husbands. I'm not sure of my details here. So she comes to draw water. She's coming with a heart that has been hurt by the presence of these passions. They could be passions which have drawn her to a love that is not faithful. Or maybe she's the victim of another's passions whose love was not faithful. Maybe she's the victim of someone's passions where she's been abused. She's obviously someone who is separated from her community, someone who's isolated and alone. And of course, we are not privy to what was in her mind, but I would suppose day after day, and going in the heat of the day with your bucket to the well, you might think some uncharitable thoughts about the people that are causing you, quote, from the outside, to have to do this hard work. And I love this picture because she's stepping up. She's stepping up to the well there. And the well, of course, is a symbol of romance in the Old Testament. And Jesus himself is also stepping up to meet her. He's entering into her world. He's reaching out to her, and instead of saying, I know all about you, what do you think you're doing? He asks her to do something for him. He restores her dignity. And in another sense, he's also breaking down barriers. She's isolated, and he, as a man, is reaching into her life, not with lust, but with love. He's reaching into her life, treating her as a subject and not as an object. He doesn't even refer to who she is at the beginning of the conversation. And in fact, he never labels her. He never judges her. He just exposes the truth about her reality. And so the beautiful thing is that as this conversation goes on, he says, woman, please give me a drink. And then she has something to say to that. And then he says, if you only knew what God is offering and who it is that is saying to you, give me something to drink, you would have been the one to ask, and he would have given you living water. So he's drawing her, like he knows that she hates walking there, and that, if she had a spigot in her front yard, she would very gladly just come out the front door like we do and get the water in the sink and be done with it, you know? So he kind of tracks her with that. But he also touches her in the deepest part of her being. She wants something more. She wants to be loved. She wants to be treated with respect. She wants to be treated as a person. She wants to be treated as a woman. And so by Jesus reaching into her life this way, he kind of rewrites her story. She has her story of who she is, who the villagers are, who her 6 husbands have been. But Jesus doesn't fall into that story. He doesn't fall into the trap of her thoughts about herself and about others, a commentary that's constantly going on inside of her. Instead, he's reaching out to her with his story that he's offering to her with an open hand. And his other hand is over her heart, his heart. I'm offering you something beautiful. I'm offering you something from my heart. So we're going to stop right there and move on, because this idea of story, of our ego image, the Samaritan woman could have said, well, it was the other guy's fault, and such. This is my story, and therefore, I have every right to be married 6 times, and et cetera, or I'm trying really hard and I really can't do anything better, et cetera. Instead, she allowed Jesus to enter into her life with his story. She didn't try to protect who she thought she was. She didn't fearfully retreat and blame Jesus so that she could continue in her own story. And she didn't bargain with him so that she could remain in her mediocrity. So the story of the Samaritan woman is a beautiful example of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, of laying down our story and taking up something new about us, that there's something beautiful and new in us that we don't even realize is there. And so she found out, as well as I found out last night, and we all have found out, that there is a lightness that we feel inside ourselves when we give ourselves permission to unpack our heart, when we give ourselves permission to not be perfect, to see ourselves not as the ego presents ourselves to us as the saint on the pedestal, but to see ourselves with all of our inauthenticities, our mistakes, our flaws, our dualities, our brokenness, and our pain. There's something in our human nature that wants to protect ourselves from being found out. We so want to be seen. It's the deepest human need to be seen by others, to be known, to be heard by another. And it is what we most fear, that another will see us as we truly are. And so because of that, we don't even want to see ourselves the way we truly are. So the Samaritan woman was very brave to enter into this conversation. She had no idea that Jesus was going to pull down the scaffolding of her story in such a gentle and kind way. It's really difficult to let go of our stories about who we are. The unconscious ego is really good at protecting its stories. We have all kinds of reasons why we have them. I can tell myself 1,000 reasons why I'm right and the other person's wrong. If we want to keep an idea or an action, then we're going to defend it tooth and nail, and it's going to make complete sense to us. In fact, it won't even enter into our heads that the story does not make sense, that it's an illusion that we've built up on our own. And so the Samaritan woman knew herself as she knew herself to be. And she created a story. She created a lifestyle. She created a schedule when she went to the well. And she didn't put herself in a position where anybody could challenge that story. And only Jesus sometimes can reach in and challenge our stories. So he reached in, he challenged her story so that she had to stop. And she almost had to say, am I going to let him in? Am I going to let him in? So there is a great difference between who the ego wants to be and who we actually are. So how do we know when our ego is at work? These are 4 different ways. 1, we justify what we always do. That little line, we've always done it this way. I've always done it this way. It's a way of justifying our ego, which is saying that I didn't do anything wrong here. Or I don't want to do something different. Because if I have to do it differently, I will find out maybe I can't. I'm not as smart as I thought I was. I don't have everything around me in control like I thought I did. So we justify what we always do. We keep ourselves from getting out of control. And amazingly, God has wonderful ways of, as he did, stepping into the Samaritan woman's life, stepping into my life through this other person, and making me unsettled, making me see that who I thought I was is not who I actually am. Another way is we feel threatened when we act in new ways. So, for example, I could decide I'm going to go over and say something to her and just kind of, apologize and how can I work together better. And there's a part of me that's going to say, oh, stop. That's dangerous. She could take over. Things might get out of control. I feel threatened. So the ego is going to protect you and me from being hurt, from being threatened, from losing our power, from discovering things about ourselves that we didn't want to discover. We have moral reasons why we can't step out of our comfort zones. A very simple kind of not too important story. I remember a long time ago, one of our, some younger sisters were in the community and they wanted to do something differently. I forgot what. And several of the not quite older sisters, they're pretty open, but maybe in their 70s, 60s and 70s, had very good moral reasons why we shouldn't do that. But in reality, those moral, spiritual, this is the right way to do it as a daughter of St. Paul reasons, justify remaining in our comfort zone. And when we tell those stories about ourselves and about others, the other then is a threat. The other then is the danger. The other then is the problem. But now we have a good spiritual and moral reason why I'm going to do it this way. We are overwhelmed with drama at moments that call for personal growth. So my little story that I told at the beginning, I kept the drama to myself, for which I'm very grateful. But I could have drama on the outside. I tend to keep it on the inside. But there was a lot of thoughts going, passions going, my heart was in a little turmoil with my little ego tantrum going on. That drama that comes up at these moments that God provides at the well of romance with him. the well of romance. These moments, not only of personal growth, but of oneness, love, and union, create drama for our ego. The ego realizes, I am losing the control here. I am losing power. I don't like this. And so we're going to step back and say, I'm not going to do that because I have a very good reason why I shouldn't do it. I am right and she is wrong. She should not be doing what she's doing. So it's our ego taking over to reinforce a story about ourselves, about life, about the community, about the family, about the country. We do it as a country too. Reinforcing that story that we keep telling and that keeps us in our comfort zone. But the more we allow ourselves to be frightened by the ego and its drama, the more we're going to end up doing everything it tells us to. And the more we will do anything other people tell us to. And so that drive for authenticity, for beauty, for truth, for goodness that's innate within us, that inner fountain that Jesus talks about of living water, gets a seal. That well is closed up, dried up, because we've chosen to remain frightened by the ego's demands and the ego tantrums and the ego's stories, to remain safely in that story. So as we surrender instead to what's happening, someone came and gave me a message. The Samaritan woman went to the well and Jesus came and was there, just happened to be there. The more we surrender to what is happening, those are the ways that Jesus enters into to intervene in our story and help us grow spiritually, to give us a new story. So as we do this, we begin to notice how our ego reacts to everything. As we begin to touch our thoughts more deeply, to be more aware of what's happening in our hearts, we begin to notice how much our ego is jumping up and down, demanding its own way. And the more we notice that, the more we realize how reactive and extreme our emotions and physical sensations are. And the more we dig into a passionate way of life and we refuse to change. So how do we get out of that? We surrender to the ego's tantrums. Don't give them an audience. Don't let them play your emotions. Just step outside yourself, look inside yourself, watch what's happening, and just remain without reacting to it. Focus on it, but focus on it from afar. And you will see it's just energy. It's going to play itself out. It's a storm like any other storm, and it will play itself out. And when we surrender in this way, we see and allow our ego resistance so that we can take action from a deeper space, so that we can take action from a deeper space. And isn't that what we really want in our lives? So as we come to a conclusion, we just take a few moments to stand beside the Samaritan woman, maybe to enter inside of her, to feel what she's feeling, that maybe quivering of hope and of possibility and of love, that someone noticed her and treated her with respect, that someone else's story may actually wash away her story, that someone else's story of her may actually be true. And we step up as we see them at the well. We step up. We step into this encounter with Jesus, who has one hand on his heart and another hand open to you, open to me, saying, your story is too little for you. It isn't even true. is hurting you, is giving you pain. Allow me to fill you with a new story, with the living water of grace, in which you will know that you are a daughter and a son of God. You are my brother and my sister. You are a temple of the Holy Spirit. You are filled in your baptism with the seeds of the virtues, with goodness. The evil one's on the outside. He's just trying to tempt you to come out from that beautiful temple and sanctuary where God lives within you. So as we hear God's story of us, as we take time later to receive that story, maybe even to write down the elements of maybe a false storyline we may be telling ourselves, that we're ready to give up now. We're ready to give up the chains as we see her holding onto that chain. And instead, we're willing to take that risk to enter into this conversation, to enter into a world outside of our own ego story. And then we, like the Samaritan woman, will be able to race back to our people, our relationships, our work, our families, our life, our prayer, and say, I have met someone who's told me everything about myself, who knows me truly. Could he be the Messiah? You can just imagine her for the rest of her life, cherishing that moment of the beginning of freedom from the chains and the beginning of a love affair that lasted her entire life and for all eternity. So thank you for this time together. Really, with my whole heart, I really cherish you. I want you to feel my love, God's love, the love the church has for you who are her child, the child that the church, the Holy Mother Church, is bringing and carrying to eternity. And that in these times of prayer and deeper spiritual reflection, we can open ourselves up to the work that the grace of God within the church is doing within us. Thank you very much. God bless you. Bye-bye.